many of you have ever thought about the space between the curb and the road? It's hard for me to see hands because of the lights, but I assume there aren't many hands up there anyway. Oh, I see a couple. This space between the curb and the road has come to be a very important space for me. I found major life lessons in the space between the curb and the road on vulnerability, visibility, and a sense of belonging. My wish for you today, by the end of my talk, is that you too will find these lessons here in the space between the curb and the road. And to help you find these lessons, I'm going to tell you some stories. But before I tell you some stories, I want to do something with you, if you would. You notice that I'm seated. You may have noticed my little cane. And if you can't really see it close up, I put a really big picture for you so you can see my super cute, super sexy pink cane. So because I have that, as much as I'd like to move around the stage and create a sense of intimacy with you by moving and create some energy, I'm afraid if I did that I would end up in your lap or your lap and we'd have more energy and intimacy than we bargained for. So I think what I'll do is just to stay here and do a little exercise with you very quickly. If we could take a few seconds and you look at me and I look at you, and you can notice that I have a burgundy scarf and I have black boots and I maybe have an amber bead on my bracelet and you have a pretty green blouse and you have beautiful white hair and you have some glasses, black horn-rimmed glasses. And I might tell you that I have on lilac-scented oil, and I washed my hair with lemongrass-scented shampoo. Close your eyes, see if you can smell it. I feel like I'm on a date. Okay, now take one last look, and then close your eyes, and imagine that you can see me moving around the stage, and you can feel me coming closer to you, and you can see that in my scarf there's actually little black peace signs in there, and that my black boots have scruff marks on the toes, and that there's a gold rim around that little amber bead on my bracelet. And can you smell the lilac and the lemongrass? There. You can open your eyes. Now don't we feel more intimately connected? And you didn't even have to buy me dinner. So, there are metaphoric spaces in between. There are spaces where between who we are and who we think we should be, between what we feel and what we think we should feel. And for women in particular, I think the spaces in between cause a sense of disconnection with us. Space between work and home, the space between parent and partner, the space between calm and chaos. But as a researcher at a think tank, the Institute for Policy Studies here in D.C., I also know that there are physical spaces between that represent actual physical survival. My first story is about that space. I'm going to tell you 3 stories. The first story is a story of injustice, and I hope it's going to make you want to take action. The second story is a more hopeful story, and I hope that you'll want to learn more about it and become inspired. And the third story is my story. And I hope that you'll see yourself in me in you, and we'll understand why we belong in community together. So my first story is the story of a mother. Her name is Edwina Nolan. I first became aware of her story in my work in a journalism project about economic hardship in the United States. Edwina lost her job in the wake of the recession. She became homeless. Her 16-year-old son got on the wrong side of the law and was sentenced to a juvenile detention center. Edwina was ordered to pay $104 a month for his incarceration, for his lodging. Edwina was homeless and unemployed and couldn't pay. She was summoned to court. She explained to the judge her circumstances. He found her in contempt of court for failure to pay the debt and put her in jail. She was let out on a work release for a day and brought home a check for $173 and thought, there, I can pay my son's $104 for his lodging and they'll let me out of jail. But instead, the sheriff had her sign over the check to the jail to pay for her own lodging, incarceration, her own booking fees, and drug test that they administer to all incoming prisoners. And Edwina remained in jail for another 28 days until the ACLU was able to get her out. Edwina found herself in the place between the curb and the road in front of the storm drain, where she was kicked down and rendered invisible. Edwina's story happens all across the country, every day in city after city. Too many of us are situated precariously between the curb and the road. Now, the next story is a more hopeful story. The next story I want to tell you about the space between the curb and the road is a step taken in truth across a busy road filled with obstacles and emerging up on the curb on the other side. Through my work on, and my study and my interest in gender, I have been allowed into the lives of dozens of families around the country, of boys who like to be beautiful, of boys who prefer dresses to dugouts and beauty to baseball. Adam, not his real name, and this isn't Adam, but this is another little boy like Adam, and this is from a story in the New York Times Magazine this August that I encourage you all to look up and read when you go home. Adam was a beautiful little boy with porcelain skin and Justin Bieber hair and big brown, chocolate brown eyes, and he liked to be beautiful, and he liked other people to see him as beautiful. He loved his special lavender-striped princess dress. He loved his magic wings, his magic wands. He loved to wear pink socks. He loved to write stories. By the time Adam was 4 years old, he had written 100 stories on princesses and rainbows. He loved to give presents of jewelry and sparkly things. He loved sparkles, glitter. I think they call it glitter. His mother told me that there was so much glitter in the house. Every time she changed his baby brother's diapers, there'd be glitter inside the diapers. Now, Adam was happy and content and authentic in his space between gender norms. Research now tells us that almost at least 10% of children are born into this unique and wonderful space on the gender spectrum. Science suggests now that this happens in a developing brain in utero. It's like left-handedness. It's unusual, but it's perfectly natural and normal. As Adam got a little older and entered into grade school, that space between started to not feel quite so beautiful. He began to be teased for his pink Hello Kitty sneakers and his pink Angry Birds t-shirt, and he started to feel caught between self-expression and self-censorship. That step between the curb and the road got to be a little harder for Adam. I suspect he has in front of him a road like Carlos, another boy who was like Adam when he was little, who went through middle school, upper elementary school and middle school, doubting his authenticity in that special place between gender norms. Carlos is now in high school. He wears mostly gender-typical clothes, but he's kept his hair long and keeps some of it dyed pink. So he came through, up on the other side, authentic in his space between. But both children and children like Adam and Carlos learned that a space that was once so authentic, this space between had times where it felt extremely uncomfortable. And that space between is a space that feels very uncomfortable for us. The space between is a space that's full of vulnerability. It's a space where we feel exposed. Now, some of you may be familiar with a very popular TED Talk by Dr. Brené Brown on vulnerability. Have people seen that talk? And Dr. Brown tells us that vulnerability is a place of fear and disconnection and a sense of not belonging. But vulnerability can also be a place where human connection and belonging and happiness is born if we're willing to be seen for who we really are. That brings me to my last story, which is my story. On New Year's Day in 1997, I woke up completely blind in one eye. I was terrified. I went to the eye doctor, who sent me to a brain doctor, who said that I had optic neuritis, which is typically, and was in my case, the first presentation of a condition called multiple sclerosis, MS. Now, MS is a condition where the protective coating on a nerve that helps your brain send messages to the rest of your body, so your body will do what your brain tells it to do. Those protective linings can get damaged or destroyed over time or suddenly. At the time that I went through my temporary blindness and my diagnosis, my partner at the time was by my side and was very supportive. He was so supportive that we ended up marrying and we had a child. And over the next 10 years, I didn't experience much in the way of symptoms. They would come and go, but they were mild, and most people didn't know that I had been diagnosed with MS. And then my marriage fell apart. And everything that I had worked so hard for, I'm sure you can relate to this, the well-being of my child, my own economic security, the economic security of my family was suddenly and painfully at risk. Metaphorically speaking, my ability to stand on my own 2 feet and move forward came to a screeching halt. Physically speaking, my ability to stand on my own 2 feet and move forward also became suddenly very difficult. The stress of those few months of painful and sudden transition brought on an attack of MS that virtually robbed me of the use of my right leg. And that was 4 years ago, and I haven't physically recovered from that. But I also spent time having to struggle with being a different person, with a different presentation to the world, a different identity. The emotional spaces between family and loss, between identity, loss of identity, new identity, are very difficult places to be in. They were very difficult places for me. But suddenly the physical places between became those hardest to navigate. The physical place between my front door and the door of my car, between my parking space and the grocery aisle and the bread aisle in the grocery store, the space between the curb and the road. My life came to be almost defined by this space between the curb and the road. How many times I had fallen into the road trying to step off that curb. How many times I felt humiliated and felt eyes looking at me as if I were some weak and broken other person. All those emotional spaces between that vulnerability came to me to be represented in this space between the curb and the road. This is a space that made me shrink from the gaze of others that I once was very comfortable in. Dr. Brown also tells us that in order to be connected to others, what we really need to do is feel a sense of authenticity. And that is by being seen for who we are. To feel that what makes us vulnerable is also the very thing that makes us beautiful. Little Adam and Carlos knew this naturally. They knew that what made them vulnerable also is what made them beautiful. And that gave them the courage to cross the road. So drawing inspiration from them, I'm beginning to be in a place where I'm more willing to be seen for who I am now than for who I used to be. I'm still tentative in that step off the curb onto the road, and I don't yet feel beautiful in my compromised ability to do that, despite having this super cute, super sexy pink cane. But I'm more willing to be seen doing it. Edwina and others like her are still just struggling to survive. Too many of us are precariously positioned between the curb and the road in front of that storm drain, invisible. So when you leave here today, I want you to take a look at that space between the curb and the road And I want you to see that storm drain and think of Edwina and the others like her who have been kicked down to the bottom, rendered invisible by policies that you can all work to help change. And I also want you to think of Adam and Carlos and their courage to be who they are in the face of societal prejudice, and embrace children like them in your children's classrooms, in your own family. And think about people like me who may be struggling with new identities or different identities. See yourself in me and me in you. And then finally, I want you to look between the curb and the road and find your own lessons there and what steps you might need to take to embrace your own vulnerabilities and to see that those are what is part of what truly makes you beautiful. And if you're walking with a friend, tell them about that space between the curb and the road. And then we can all be in community together. Thank you.